Good morning, everyone. It is just about 5 o'clock in the morning on August 30th, 2019. And as you know from the title of this video, we are starting the battle between the Chord Mojo and the iFi iDSD Black Label. That hurt my throat. So these two devices, they're very similar. They're both black. They both produce sound. They both have headphone connections. And, right. The audiophile community just gushes about both of them. And they're both very, very expensive. And the average individual probably wouldn't go out and buy either of these two devices. You know, average meaning individuals who are not diehard audiophile fans and people who have a mortgage to pay and families to take care of and pets to take care of and, life. But let's just pretend that those individuals have money and they actually have a liking for music and to improve their listening experience. And they are stuck between the iFi Black Label and the Chord Mojo, despite the fact that there are many other options out there. So today's video is going to focus on three things. We're going to talk about the power, the soundstage, and the detailed retrieval. And then the following videos, we're going to break down the sound signatures of each, going into the bass response, the mids, and the treble, and finally a concluding video with my thoughts regarding the test. So let's start with the power. The iFi iDSD Black Label is exceptionally powerful. So there are three power modes for headphones on the iFi. There's the Eco mode, and at Eco mode, you get 250 milliwatts at 16 ohms. And you may say to yourself, boy, that's nothing. At 16 ohms, 250 milliwatts, that's silly. That's true, but you also have to realize that Eco mode is what iFi recommends if you're going to use IEMs in your monitors. So you want to put it in Eco mode so it's at the lowest power output to make sure that number one, you don't destroy your IEMs, and number two, you don't destroy your ears. Then there's normal mode, which is what most people would probably keep their device at. And at normal mode, it's 100 milliwatts at 300 ohms and 950 milliwatts at 32 ohms. Did you hear that? 950 milliwatts at 32 ohms on normal. And then you have turbo mode. And on turbo mode, you have 166 milliwatts at 600 ohms and a whopping 1,560 milliwatts at 64 ohms. Oh, wow, right? That is a lot of power being driven by this tiny device. Okay, so I say tiny, it's not all that tiny, but it's a lot. There are a plethora of desktop amplifiers that will never reach 1.5 watts of power. This thing that is battery powered and can be carried in your backpack, and I wouldn't say you carry it in your pocket because that's probably it's not possible. I mean, it is possible. You're just going to look ridiculous. They don't have 1.5 watts, but this thing does. In comparison, the Chord Mojo looks silly. It has 720 milliwatts at 8 ohms and 35 milliwatts at 600 ohms. Yeah, at 35. You know, we were talking about the Mojo versus the Cobalt over the last several days. And our concern was, oh my goodness, the Mojo is going to just blow the Cobalt out of the water with the volume and with the power. And now, boy, have the tables turned, huh? The iFi Micro, or excuse me, is it Micro? Nano? I keep forgetting. Micro. The iFi Micro iDSD Black Label is going to destroy the Mojo on paper with the power. Oh, Mojo, where have you gone? Okay, so the power itself doesn't mean that the particular device is, one device is better than the other, right? Just because the iFi has 1.5 watts of power at 64 ohms on turbo mode, it doesn't mean that it is going to provide good, clean, accurate sound. It just means it's got to provide that much power. You may never need the turbo mode. You may need the turbo mode if, for example, you have really, really hard to drive headphones. 600 ohm headphones or the T50RP mods or some other pair of headphones that simply, for some reason, can't be powered by any other device that you've ever used. And in that circumstance, the iFi would very likely be the portable product, that you would want to consider. Let's talk about Soundstage, okay? And by Soundstage, I mean width. Do these devices have similar width, different width, depth, similar depth, different depth, things of that nature? Now, before we start on that, iFi's website, it says that this is a warm and smooth sounding DAC amp. And they say, quote, "It is the music from your headphones or speakers." Well, I'm sorry, I misread it. Is the music from your headphones or speakers interesting, uninteresting, or flat? Then the iFi iDSD Black Label is for you. It adds warmth, depth, and smoothness to your favorite tunes. Put simply, your music will sound better than it ever has. Ooh, 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 what? Boy, that's a lot of marketing there. So let's get to it, huh? Now that we know what the marketing says for iFi, we know what the marketing says for the Mojo because everybody says it. Let's start for our Soundstage test. We're going to start with Flight from the City, and I have both devices plugged into USB 3 ports. They're also plugged into the AB switch that I have, and today I'm still using the Allo Audio S4R close-back reference class headphone. I currently have the iFi plugged in, and let's start with Flight from the City. And the idea is to figure out how wide the device feels to me. Now currently, it's set on normal mode, and the volume is probably about 10 o'clock, no more than 10 o'clock. Sounds very loud to me. This is the volume I would listen to this song, and I wouldn't listen to it any louder. I don't hear any muffled signatures at all. No muffled piano signatures. I'm going to change the power output from normal to eco. And on eco, it certainly decreases the volume. I haven't changed the volume knob. And the other thing that it's done is that it's cut out that sizzle in the background of the song. There's this electric buzz sizzle that goes on. And in eco mode, it's harder to hear it. Now let's go back to the normal. And everything just picks up exponentially. You hear all that detail, the sizzle in the background, the compression of the piano keys onto the keyboard itself, the reverberance of that keyboard as it's being pressed down upon. Let's increase to turbo mode, and that is ear-piercingly loud. And in turbo mode, I would say the piano sounds muffled, although the detail is also still present. The creaking in the seat and the buzzing in the background is still there. It's just that the piano has a little bit more of a muffled signature to it. Let's go back to normal. And in normal mode, not changing the volume from 10 o'clock, it sounds the following. The piano has this kind of a warm tonality to it. So there's the reverberation that carries through as soon as the keyboard is hit, right? The piano keys are pressed down, and you hear the thunk of each piano key. It's not a sharp thunk, it's more of a heavy thud sort of sound. And I say it's a heavy thud sort of sound because once the key is pressed, there's the lingering reverberation of that thudding. It's not long, it's not seconds, but it does have a heavy weight to it. There's good separation of instruments, the piano and the cello. I can hear at least 2 string instruments, one in the right ear cup, one in the left ear cup. I can hear the sizzle quite distinctly, and the piano is itself quite distinct. Okay. So this seems to have a very warm presentation, but it doesn't distort the detail. So I can hear, at least on normal mode, right? I can hear the sizzle in the background. I can hear the multiple string instruments. I can hear a bell that comes in intermittently. I can hear the piano frequency. It doesn't sound analytical by any sense. The piano isn't, I would say, muffled, but it is subdued. There's a reverberation. And depending on your headphones, the type of headphones you have, the sound signature of those headphones, what's going to happen is either it's going to accentuate that, robust piano signature and help it sound more muffled, or it's just not going to interfere and you're going to hear the piano signature as it's coming through from the iFi, right? So, for example, if you have a pair of Bose headphones and you plug them into this thing and you play this song, you will likely experience the piano in a much more muffled and more heavy-handed and more distorted way, because that's just the sound signature of the Bose drivers. But if you have something that is much more neutral and flat, like the Olo, then the headphone is not the thing that you should be worried about. The headphone is simply providing the music as it's being played through the device, and you're really just hearing the song and the DAC combination. And in this case, with the iFi, I would say that the sound signature is smooth, separated. Each tonality is separate, but it's not analytical. It does have that kind of heavy, almost veiled but not quite veiled piano signature. Now let's switch to the Mojo. Okay, now we're on the Mojo, and let's start the song again. The Mojo's volume is at double orange, not quite 10 o'clock on the iFi on normal, so I'm going to increase it to what I think is comparable. And I would say that it's double yellow. And if I sound congested right now, it's because I am a little congested. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and my body hasn't had the opportunity to wake up. It's really hard to tell the difference between these two devices. I have to say that the piano sounds very similar on both. The string instrument also, I can't pick out any obvious differences. The reverberation on the piano sounds the same to me. Now I can keep increasing the volume on the Mojo. Now it's double green. And on double green, The piano, at double green, the piano has this weird distortion. And it's hard to explain. Okay, let me try to figure this out. I'm going to stop the music here, go back to about 137, switch to the iFi, and start playing again. Yeah, okay. Strangely enough, even though at the beginning of the song the Mojo seems to have the same characteristics, the same sound signature as the iFi, when the piano starts playing and you're really getting into the song and you start ramping up the volume just little by little, I start to notice that the Mojo's representation of the piano gets more and more distorted as the louder I make the unit. So I started from double orange, which is where I usually start on this device, and then I ramped it up to double yellow so that it would be at the same volume as the iFi at approximately 10 o'clock. And what happened is that at double orange, and I feel like such an idiot talking about colors as volume, but as double orange, I couldn't really hear a difference between the two. And on double yellow, I started to hear distortion on the Mojo. And the distortion came with the piano. The piano would be played, right? The keyboard would be pressed down, the keys would be pressed down, and you would hear that reverberation, and then you would have a sizzle in the background. What the Mojo did is that it just started distorting the piano press with the sizzle in the background, and the piano press sounded grainy, like really obviously grainy, which is why I stopped and went back to 1 minute and 47 seconds and switched to the iFi to listen. And the iFi doesn't represent that at all. Now remember, I placed the Mojo on double yellow so that it would have approximately the same volume as the iFi at 10 o'clock. So when I switched back to the iFi, I didn't change the volume setting. I played it again, and I listened to that specific spot, and the iFi did not represent the graininess that was obvious to me on the Mojo. Now, you may say, what difference does it actually make? Is it really that important if you hear just a little bit of graininess? Well, maybe not, because some people may like the grainy sound in a piece, but if one device adds grain when volume is increasing and the other device does not, that's a differentiation that might be of some merit to some people. Okay, so now let's go to New Light by Kazuki, and we're going to look for detail and separation. I have the iFi currently plugged in, so let's start with that. Excellent representation of the crunching of the feet on the grass. Not the crunching of the feet on the grass, but crunching of the grass as the feet come down. I can very clearly hear the person walking. I can hear the wind. I can hear the crunch of the grass. I can hear the kids playing in the background. I heard the piano, undistorted, not muffled at all. I hear the synth music as it slowly ramps up in volume. I hear the wind rustling through the grasses in this open field. There's soundstage left and right as the person is walking, in the middle, and then it walks all the way to the far edge on the left ear cup. Now the acoustic guitar is playing. Guitar doesn't sound heavy at all. That frequency of the guitar doesn't linger and interfere with any of the other stuff that's going on. I'm going to increase the volume to about noon. Even with an increased volume, I hear everything separated. The guitar frequency is not interfering with any of the others. That big synth sound that's now prevalent in the song is not distorted. All the instruments seem to have a hard separation. Their tonalities have a hard separation. I'm going to bring the volume back down to 10 o'clock. Okay. Now let's switch to the Mojo and start the song again. I hear the crunching of the grass underneath the feet. And the kids I hear in the background, but they're a little bit more muffled. The volume, by the way, is still on double yellow. I clearly hear the wind. I hear the piano, but it sounds much more muffled on the Mojo than it did on the iFi. I'll increase the volume a little bit. No, it's on double green. And on double green, that guitar sounds a bit heavier, but it could just be my imagination. Maybe there's not a huge difference, but I think that the reverberation of the guitar strings is slightly longer. I mean, we're talking about minor length. Like, it's a tiny bit longer, if it is at all. Now the synth sound is prevalent. It has increased to about almost max volume. The guitar is much more subdued when the synth sound is playing at max. It's a little harder to separate from the synth sound. Okay. So for this particular song, I would, again, we're trying to really mince words, essentially, or we're trying to cut a very fine line between these two because they do have a very similar sound signature. But when we get down to it, the detail and the soundstage seems to be better on the iFi for the following reasons. I heard the person walking from center all the way to the edge on my left ear cup, and I could hear the crunching of the feet. I keep saying crunching of the feet. It's not like it's the mob trying to break somebody's foot. The crunching of the grass as he's walking from point A to point B. On the Mojo, I didn't hear that he moved from center all the way to the left ear cup. I heard crunching. I just didn't know. It just sounded dead center to me. When the guitar starts playing, the guitar initially sounds about the same on both. I think that the Mojo probably presents the guitar plucking a little bit more, with a little bit more resonance, a bit more boost in that frequency range. But that could have been just my imagination. What wasn't, I don't think, a part of my imagination is when the synth comes in and it's playing near the middle of the song. It's playing almost at max volume, and the guitar comes back. In that particular portion of the song, the iFi has a clear, hard separation between the guitar frequency and the synth, and the Mojo simply combines those two a little bit too much, and the guitar comes out as muffled. And that seems to be a consistency with the Mojo, not just with this particular test, but with every test that we've applied the Mojo in. That the Mojo simply has a much more muffled and veiled sound than other devices we have compared it to. Now, with the iFi, which is supposed to be rather similar to the Mojo, at least by audiophile commentary, the iFi simply has a better amount of separation, even though it might be slight, not a huge, night and day difference like it was with the Cobalt. It's still a difference worth noting. Okay, so now let's go to our last song, which is Want You Back by Haim, and I currently have the Mojo plugged in. But I'm going to switch to the iFi because we're doing the AB thing. Okay, back on the iFi, and let's go to Want You Back. Volume is still at 10 o'clock. No harshness, no sibilance. The piano and the guitar have a good separation. No muffled sound signature. I hear the two backup vocalists clearly separated, left and right. They have very dissimilar tonalities, so their tonalities are unique to each other. I'm going to increase the volume to about 11. When all the mix is playing now, you have the drum, the piano, the guitar, and the three vocalists. I could hear the primary vocalist. The instruments are somewhere in the background, probably 2 or 3 steps behind the primary vocalist. And then you have the secondary vocalists. But the secondary vocalists, I wouldn't say are particularly differentiated when the entire mix is playing. You know they're there, you hear them, but their tonalities don't cut through the rest of the mix. Now when it's just the drum being played intermittently and the guitar strumming lightly, you could clearly hear all three vocalists very differently with their own particular tonalities. When the entire mix is playing, as it is at this portion of the song, the backup vocalists are audible. I can hear them. I know they're there, but they become a bit too much combined with the rest of the mix, the instruments. Unless they do something to stand out, like one of them sings at a much higher tenor register. Not tenor, but a much higher register. Like one of them is right now. But I would say no harshness, very smooth across the board, no sibilance, no ear-piercing nature. And the only muffled thing I could say is present is when all the instruments are playing and the backup vocalists are a little bit harder to hear. And their separate tonalities are simply not present to me when the entire mix is playing. Okay, so now let's go to the Chord Mojo. Okay, now we have the Mojo selected, and start again. So far, it sounds about the same to me. I hear no discernible difference between the two. The piano and the guitar seems to be about the same amount of separation as on the iFi. No harshness, no sibilance. I could hear the backup vocalist in about the same manner as I heard it on the iFi. But the difference, here's the thing. The iFi presented the separation of the backup vocalist a little bit better than the Mojo. The Mojo just, right out of the bat, melds the two backup vocalist tonalities, whereas the iFi starts off with a separation, And as the mix progresses, it combines their two voices together, so it's harder to hear the difference. The guitar resonance seems to be about the same on both. I don't hear it linger longer on the Mojo than on the iFi, or vice versa. Now at this point, so let's stop. Let's do a real comparison here for a second. Let's go back to about 1 minute and 30 seconds. So at 1 minute 30 seconds, most of the instruments stop. You have a light strumming of the guitar and an intermittent drum. Then you have the primary vocalist and the backup vocalist coming in and backing up, obviously, the primary vocalist. And I want to hear for the backup vocalist and try to pinpoint if there is an actual difference in their tonality between these two devices. Okay? So we're at 1 minute and 29 seconds. I currently have the Mojo at double green. Let's listen for that, and then I'll stop and go and switch to the iFi. Okay. And we're going to switch to the iFi. Okay, I'm going to try it one more time because I think I do hear a difference. I'm going to play it on the iFi once again and then switch to the Mojo. Yeah. So I would say that there is a very ever so slight difference in separation of the two backup vocalists at 1 minute and 34, 1 minute 35 seconds. That on the iFi, they come out a little bit cleaner, a little bit more crisply than on the Mojo. That separation, when you do an A and B test, seems to be apparent. But when you're listening, you listen to the iFi and then you come back the next day and you listen to it on the Mojo, I seriously doubt you'll be able to tell that there is in fact a difference. What you'll probably hear is, oh, I like this song, if you like the song. So on an A-B test, yes, there's a very, very slight difference in the presentation of the backup vocalist, but it's not a huge difference. Ultimately, after taking a look at the power, the soundstage, and now some of the detail issues, here's what I would say about this. I think that the iFi is more similar to the Mojo than it is dissimilar, right? So you could easily mistake the iFi for the Mojo in a blind test and vice versa. Whereas with the Cobalt, you would have had a very difficult time mixing the two tonalities. I mean, you couldn't say the Cobalt sounds like the Mojo and the Mojo sounds like the Cobalt. That's not possible unless you have some really bad ears. But with the iFi and the Mojo, it's hard. It's really hard to differentiate these two, and I'm nitpicking and trying to really eke out the differences and the dissimilarities between. And if you've noticed, despite listening for 30 minutes, I haven't really talked about a whole lot of differences because, frankly, they're not there. These two devices provide, for all practical reasons, all practical analysis, the same tonality. The biggest difference between these two is really going to come down to functionality. It's not going to be so much about their sound signature. Now, we'll still do the full test, the bass, the mids, and the treble. But I can say that it's probably, excuse me, I just kind of stood up in my chair. I would say that it would probably not be a surprise to anybody if I concluded that these two devices are hard to separate in tonality. So if that's why you were considering one or the other, and you were matching these two up to decide which one you should buy, the sound signature really isn't what I would focus on. I would instead focus on the other features that these devices have. And I think when you talk about features, the iFi is probably going to win that battle without any problems. But we will come to that conclusion in its due course. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, but you are a viewer of this channel, I would ask you to please consider subscribing. I am on Patreon, and if you feel compelled to help sustain this channel, then perhaps you will consider becoming a patron. For a couple of bucks a month, you can help keep this channel going, help me buy new devices to test, because almost every day I have people asking me to test devices I don't have. And if you just enjoy this content, if you find it entertaining, if you find it informative, then maybe you will feel compelled to throw a little bit of your hard-earned money my direction once a month. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please leave them below. And if you want to request a review from the various gear that I have, please look in the description below for the review request form. Use that link, goes to it will take you to a Google document. Please fill out the Google document, and I will get to your review as soon as I can. Other than that, I hope all of you have a wonderful Friday, because it's Friday, for me at least, and that you enjoy your upcoming weekend. Have a great day.